Yeah, you can start.
And that will let a few more people join, but it also means we don't get too delayed. But yeah, so my name is Simon Duffy. I'm from Citizen Network, and Citizen Network is a partner with KVPS and many other organizations, including Mana Wanui, in the Self-Directed Support Network. So this is an event of the Self-Directed Support Network, which is a global network to promote learning and development and innovation in self-direction in health and social care and beyond, rooted in a belief that everyone is equal and everybody has human rights, and that everybody should have the chance to live a full and meaningful life, and that we should organize the support we offer each other in a way that makes that possible. In fact, it's just to say, in introducing Marsha, I met Marsha for the first time in 2015 at the Global Self-Determination Conference in Vancouver. And that is relevant here because Marsha, myself, and Tim Stainton, who people may, if people were at our last webinar towards the end of last year, Tim Stainton spoke about developments in Canada. We talked about how do we, it's great to have events, and there have been a handful of big conferences around the world about self-directed support or other words for that. But what do we do in between the conferences? Shouldn't we be learning and talking really all the time and learning all the time? And I certainly felt that, having led quite a few changes in England, that we suffered from not being so well connected, and that we weren't always aware of what other people had been doing. I know that I knew a little bit more than most people in England just because I'd traveled a little bit, but my little bit was a tiny fraction of what I could have known. And there is a lot of experience, because self-direction goes back at least 50 years to the mid-1960s in California. So there have been a lot of efforts, a lot of progress, and a lot of challenges over those 50 years. And so we wanted to give birth to some kind of ongoing learning community. And the other conversation I had in Canada back in 2015 was with my friend Kate Fulton, who works in Australia, about how do we grow a global inclusion movement. And really that conversation and the self-directed support conversations for us were really all part of the same thing, because self-directed support is, in a sense, just technology. And technology is good, but it's really, what are the values that underpin the technology that's really important? And so that's what really led to the development of Citizen Network and our partnership with KVPS to develop the Self-Directed Support Network. So Citizen Network is a kind of host with KVPS of the Self-Directed Support Network. Citizen Network works on other projects around basic income, community development, democratic reform, anything that advances citizenship for all. But we're really pleased and proud to be working with KVPS on this project. And we've managed over time to get a little bit of European funding to support the development of this. And we hope in the years ahead that we can keep growing this movement. And as interest grows in Europe, we can also strengthen our connections outside Europe. So that's really the objective. And that brings us back to Marsha, because Marsha has been one of the great leaders of self-direction in New Zealand. And Marsha will tell us more, but I think there have been all sorts of interesting changes and developments in New Zealand. It's been a long journey, because, and there've been ups and downs, and I visited a couple of times, and usually it feels like there's lots and lots of good intentions, but also quite difficult. But I think some of that is now really starting to change, and Mana Wanui, the organization that Marsha heads up, is playing a critical role in that. And it plays a very interesting role because it also provides a lot of the kind of the in-between stuff that makes the system work. So I'm sure Marsha will tell us about that, but it makes what we will learn from Marsha, I think, has a lot of relevance in every country, because every country needs to think hard about how do we make this stuff easier for people. It's not just about having a budget or having self-directed support. It's actually being able to do that in a way that makes life more fun, more fulfilling, more positive, not lots and lots of paperwork and complexity. That's probably enough. And I guess we've probably hit what we're going to get now. So Marsha, can I hand it over to you? And tell me if there's any problems, but we'll just let you speak for about 40 odd minutes.
Great, thanks, Simon. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, which is greetings, greetings, greetings to you all in Maori, which is our Indigenous culture in New Zealand. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a fantastic pleasure to be here, and I love sharing what we've done in New Zealand with everybody because it's my favorite topic. And so I'm just going to start by sharing my screen and hope that the technology works here. Yep, we're all good. If anyone can't see that, please just let me know so that I can do something about it. Before I get started, though, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about who I am so that you know who you're talking to. And as I understand it, questions can come at the end. So I'm just going to truck on through this. Really, really happy to answer any questions at the end. And I will be sharing the slide deck with both Simon and Heidi. So you can ask for it at any time. We're going to distribute it to anyone who wants it. And also my email is at the end, and I'm really happy to take questions by email as well. So my name is Marsha Marshall, believe it or not. My parents didn't have a strange sense of humor. That's a married name. I'm the CE of Manawanui, and I have been for 10 years. I've worked in health and disability for over 30 now. My background is as a pediatric nurse, and you probably can tell that I'm not a Kiwi just by my accent. I'm a Canadian expat. I've been in New Zealand now for 24 years. I came to New Zealand kicking and screaming, saying I'm not going to like it, and here I am 24 years later. It's a great place to be. And I am really passionate about self-direction because I have seen the transformational impact that it has with my own eyes. My dad had MS, so that's my lived experience, and he certainly did not benefit from the transformation that, or even the life changes that self-direction offers. So that's underpinned my passion as well. And that is me. So now let's hope that this works. Not sure why it's not progressing for me. There we go. Okay, this is what I'm going to go through today, just a glimpse of the content. I'm going to talk about the Power of Freedom report, which was, well, I'll talk about that, but it was a report that came out in August in 2021, and it was a big research report on individualized funding, which was a great illustration of the transformational effect that that self-direction has on people's lives. I'm going to talk about self-direction in New Zealand, how it works, the state of the nation, which Simon has alluded to. We've come a long way. And self-direction as the future. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Gonna go back. The fact that we believe that self-direction is a human rights issue. And then Simon also alluded to technology, and I want to talk a little bit about what that's meant for Manawanui and for self-direction in New Zealand, and then some cost comparisons, and then I'm going to talk about outcomes as well, of course. What I do want to say right off the bat is that some of our customers who I'm going to talk about today, Lisa Holton and Sarah, are in the Zoom. So I want to thank them for offering up their story and allowing us to profile them because really that's what this is all about. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about Manawanui. We're the pioneer and leading facilitator The name Manawanui, in case you are wondering, means, it's a Maori word, and it means perseverance and tenacity, steadfast, big mana, which is big spirit. And I can tell you, and Simon alluded to this too, that we've earned that name. It's taken a long time to push through self-direction in New Zealand, at least 20 years. And we're now getting to a point where, because of perseverance and tenacity, and not just with Manawanui, but with the disability sector and disabled people, we really have some traction on what this thing looks like, and doing it every single day. So that's the name. We were formally established in 2004. We now have about 75% of the eligible market in New Zealand using self-direction. We have about what that looks like is 6,000 people who are using some kind of an iteration of self-direction, and 6,000 with Manawanui, 8,000 across the country. And I'm going to tell you why that matters as we go along. We have over 20,000 support workers that we pay through our system, and $180 million of government funding goes through Manawanui each year. What enables that is our digital solutions and tools to make it easy. That's a critical, you'll see the values of our organization behind me. One of them is we make it easy, and that is critical to what we do. So we look at scalable solutions. I was saying before we started this webinar that that's something we continue to learn. You know, the scalability is difficult, but it's required in order to make self-direction really work, because people need support to make it happen, particularly when you're in a context of bureaucracy and policy barriers and all of those things that I know that you all are very familiar with. So that's who Manawanui is. What prompted this webinar is, in New Zealand, there is a policy think tank called the New Zealand Initiative, and they did a research report on individualized funding. Our chair, Bill English, who I know is in the Zoom as well, is a member of the New Zealand Initiative. The author, Matt Burgess, did a very, very comprehensive research report. The website is there. I encourage you all to go and look at that webinar, and we can get you a copy of the report if you're interested in it. It has like I said, a comprehensive background to the evolution of individualized funding in New Zealand. But I'm going to go through the content of this report as we work through the webinar at a high level. So I encourage you to, like I said, go and have a look at it. So this is the content. It's a content overview. I'm just going to get rid of that. So it's origins of IF. So when I say IF, I mean individualized funding. And as with any system, we have acronyms. So I will try to make sure that I define what those acronyms are as we go along. But IF, individualized funding in New Zealand and overseas, how it works, comparing outcomes between individualized funding and self-direction and traditional models, and then outcomes. Okay. There we go. Okay, one of the best things about this report is that Matt, when he was doing the research, he said to me, I want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. And he really, really dug into that. And the best part about it is he interviewed people who are using IF. Those are the people that tell the real stories. And like I said, Lisa Holton and Sarah are in the Zoom. These pictures are of Sarah living her best life. And Philip Paxton, who is on the other side, Philip says, I don't want a good life. I want an effing great life. And I think that that's really relevant, because disability support services have been patronizing and really a top-down, we know what's best for you approach, when really we don't. You know, and a good life is actually saying, I want a good life is actually a little bit patronizing, you know. What's wrong with an effing great life? And Lisa says it's the difference between night and day, having individualized funding and being self-directed. Lisa also says so much of, just to put this in context, Lisa is a full-time carer for Sarah, and you'll see the difference that self-direction makes as I go through this webinar. But Lisa says it's a matter of love and luck, and I thought, that's really true, and you can see that with people who live with disability in their lives every day. Right. Okay. So I know that I'm preaching to the converted here, but I wanted to put in context what self-direction actually means in New Zealand. So it began from families demanding more control and choice. And when I talk a little bit more about Philip Paxton, who wants the effing good life, he was one of the founding members of Manawanui. He was on the board, and he was one who went to the funder, the Ministry of Health, and said, actually, this isn't good enough. I can do better. Please give me the money and I will do it. All right. And that's what self-direction actually means in New Zealand. It's putting the control of the resources in the hands of who needs it. And we believe at Manawanui that this is a fundamental human right. It's not a privilege. I think personally that the health and disability system traditionally has relied on the fact that the duty of care argument is one that we can't ignore, but the duty of care actually is in the hands of the people that need that care. So I think that that's an important point to make. And self-directed funding in New Zealand recognizes that we are all the experts in our own lives and the systems are not. So it's shifting the concept to work with the person, right? The social model of disability, not doing to. And that people live in a lot of different contexts and settings that actually matter. All right. So, and here again, I'm preaching to the converted, but it's all about choice, control, and flexibility. You get to choose who sees you naked every day. And, when we talk about self-direction in New Zealand and we say, you get to choose who comes into your life and what they do with you, it's more than about what you want to do today or what you want to eat today or what you want to watch on TV or what you want to wear. It's as fundamental as those intimate things like who gets to see you naked every day. And when I say it like that, most people can relate to that. That's a choice that you really want to make yourself. And it's about choosing who interacts with you for the most intimate stuff in your life. And when you're at your most vulnerable, right? Most of us are pretty vulnerable when we're naked or asking somebody to put food in our mouths. There's flexibility in how you use your funding. You choose when and how support is provided, and that means you choose your own employees. You can contract them. You can choose what services you want to buy through businesses. You get greater personalization to your own needs. And so what choices match your needs and what fits your lifestyle? Okay, so this is a little bit of that boring history. Individualized funding in New Zealand has evolved over the last probably 20 years. There was the first pilot was in Christchurch, and again that was it was due to demand from disgruntled people who, like Philip, who said, I can do a lot better than what is happening here. And in the Power of Freedom report, there is a section on the differences between traditional provider approaches and self-directed approaches, IF. That is really profound in that, individualized funding or self-directed support is much more reliable and obviously gives you a lot more flexibility and choice. 2001, they put a moratorium on individualized funding because they didn't, the funder, the Ministry of Health, couldn't track had no understanding and no transparency of what was happening with all of these budgets, and they were called discretionary budgets at the time. So then, happily, the demand increased, and the first formal host organization, which is Manawanui, was established. And that was after a tender based on the demand from people using individualized funding. And 2008, there was 130 people using IF, and there's a really high satisfaction rate. So this is the year that I was at the Ministry of Health. I went to the Ministry of Health in 2008, and I did the review, and people loved it. What they didn't like was the administrative burden and the fact that they had to do a lot of paperwork to make it work. But basically, the feedback on that was really, really positive. And the Minister for Disability Issues at the time, Tariana Turia, set up a parliamentary committee to review it. And she basically said, we want more of that people want more of that, and we think it's a good thing. We want more of that yesterday. So that gave it skates, really. And that was when we were able to expand out individualized funding across the country. We established 13 host providers, 9 still operate. And just to put that in context, 2008, we had 130 people using it. There were really tight criteria around who was able to use it, who's allowed to use it. Now we have 8,000 people across the country using it. And the criteria are much looser. And I will get to where we're going with that in a minute. But that's really significant because it's an evolution, but it's been a long evolution. So how it works, in New Zealand, there is a gatekeeper, and that's the NASC. And what I mean by that, the NASC is a Needs Assessment and Service Coordination Organization. And that is the front end. People must go to a NASC to get an assessment in order to be able to have access to individualized funding. All right, and that's, the NASC is an agent of the funder and allocates funding to the person. Then the person comes to a host organization like Manawanui, and we set up the customer in our digital systems and our self-service platforms. And I'll show you a glimpse of that as we go through this as well. The person employs and contracts support staff, or they purchase disability items. That's a new thing, purchasing disability items. You weren't allowed to do that in the early days of individualized funding. So it's quite significant. And as you know, it's not always a support staff that makes a good life. Sometimes it's an item that might allow people to get to the beach or undertake activities in their life that makes their life good or great. The person then sends timesheets or expense claims through to us. We pay the staff or the person, and then we invoice the funder or the Ministry of Health, whichever, and I'll get to who the funders are in New Zealand in a minute. And the payment is always retrospective. So basically, we either pay the person's support staff, or else we'll pay on an invoice for something that they might have bought. But they buy it, we pay for it. The person gets their support staff in, care is delivered, and then we pay for it. And then we invoice back the funder. All right, so that does make it a bit clunky, but it also gives the funder comfort that they're not paying for stuff that isn't being delivered. And that's really important. One of the things about the evolution of individualized funding in New Zealand is that, it's really uncomfortable for funders to give control of money to people. So that retrospective thing has worked in terms of giving the funder comfort that public money is being used well. The person, fundamentally, the person is the decision maker around how, when, and who delivers their support. But it's still within purchasing guidelines, because this is public money, it's tax money, and there needs to be some accountability around it. And I will go through those purchasing guidelines in a minute as well. There we go. Okay, this is a simplified view of what the process looks like. So like I said, people go to the NASC and get an assessment or an allocation of budgets, of a budget for their support. The host provider, that's what Manawanui is, we're a host. We onboard the person, we coach them on the use of the funding. So we help them to say, what is it that you want and why has this funding been allocated to you, and how do you want to spend it over, usually the course of a year. Each budget is usually for a year. Then the person goes off and chooses who they want to support them. They purchase the services and or, like I've just said, items that might create the good life for them. And then they retrospectively claim through the host provider, which is Manawanui. Well, Manawanui is one of 9. Here are the purchasing guidelines. Now, in the early days of individualized funding in New Zealand, the only thing that you could buy were hours of support and associated overheads. So you could buy, you could hire your support person, you could buy a laptop to help you pay the bills, to send in emails to Manawanui to help us pay your support people. You could buy a desk or a filing cabinet because that was to be used in the implementation of your individualized funding. But during there's a few demonstration projects that have popped up around the country with the intention of making individualized funding a lot more flexible. And during COVID, they realized that people actually needed a lot more, the funder, Ministry of Health, realized that people needed a lot more flexibility in order to maintain their safety in their own home because we were all locked down. So they rolled out these 4 criteria that previously had only been available in the demonstration projects. I'm going to show you those. But in my view, is one of the best things that best evolutions that has happened with individualized funding or self-direction, any iteration of self-direction in New Zealand. So there's 4 of them. The first one is that it has to make your life better or easier. And I always say, well, that's really, that's a really vague purchasing guideline, because you could say I'm going out to buy a big bottle of whiskey and that's going to make my life better or easier. It is qualified by saying it has to be within your goals. So during that allocation process, goals are written, and you need to have a plan. You need to say, I'm going to use disability support funding to make my life better or easier in this particular way. So you have to articulate that plan. And just to qualify the whiskey, you're not allowed to buy whiskey with individualized funding. Okay, and then the next criteria is that it has to be a disability support. You have to be able to defend it as something that you're purchasing to help you with your disability. So the best, well, one of the examples that I use is trampoline. So like I said before, you couldn't buy items. Let's just say you have a son who's going through adolescence, and he keeps everybody up at night because he deteriorates in the evening, which we know happens, and punches holes in walls, and nobody's getting any sleep. But when he jumps on the trampoline, tuckers him right out, and he sleeps at night, so everybody else sleeps at night. You could defend that as a disability support. You could buy the trampoline. All right, so there's a lot of examples like that. I guess one of the outcomes of these criteria is that people have a lot more flexibility, but that's the tricky thing, is being able to defend it as a disability support, these purchases. The third one is that it's reasonable and cost effective. So if you're going to buy the trampoline, you have to make sure that it doesn't take up your entire budget. Otherwise, you have no budgets for support for the rest of the year. So that's the reasonable criteria. And also, they don't want you to buy, and keeping in mind that this is government money, they don't want you to buy the champagne version of something just because your budget is there. They want you to buy what any average person would buy in that respect, or that it has to relate to number 2, that it's a disability support. So an example of that would be somebody comes and says, I want to buy an industrial washing machine because we have an issue with incontinence in the house and I have to do a lot of washing, right? If they're buying a washing machine, you want it to make sure that it's cost effective and reasonable, so that industrial washing machine, you're allowed to buy something that's a lot more expensive, but you still don't want to buy something that would end up in a laundromat, for example. It has to be the average cost of that item. So the fourth criteria is it's not excluded or funded anywhere else. Just like any government department, I can imagine anywhere around the world, the government does not want to buy something twice. So if it's funded in a different funding stream, then you can't buy it with your individualized funding budget. That's problematic because not every funding stream is done well. And so I always qualify this with our customers and say, even if it's done badly, you can't purchase it if it's funded elsewhere. And the best examples of this is therapies. So speech language therapy, physiotherapy, they're funded elsewhere on a different funding stream. So you're not allowed to buy that using your individualized funding. Like I said, this is certainly not perfect. And we've still got a long way to go, because it would be really nice if people could buy what they need and not be excluded because there happens to be another funding stream that is managed potentially not as well. So onwards we go. Happy to take questions. But this is the most contentious part usually of individualized funding, because it's not perfect yet and people still don't have full flexibility. But it is about the government accounting for the use of the funding. Okay. So the great thing about self-direction is that funding can be used in a way that works for any individual in their whānau. Whānau is family. So the groups that we can support in New Zealand, we're always looking for new groups to support because it works and we like to prove that it works. So we're very good. Manawanui has a high appetite for risk. And I know our chair would agree with that. We're happy to take on pilot projects and experiments to show that self-directed funding actually really works. We've got a couple of those on the go now in mental health and in Maori circles, Maori disability, and we're also working with the Housing Trust to look at how we support people with disabilities who need government support for housing. So what we're currently working, the biggest demographic we have is people who are under 65 years of age with a long-term disability, and that's funded by the Ministry of Health currently. We also have some people in the older person space. I'm actually down in Tauranga today to meet with the DHB about a new contract for health of older people. And so that's people who are going into retirement villages or who need support as they age, which is really exciting. In keeping with the human rights approach, we do think, and we know that self-direction works in a wide variety of demographics. So chronic long-term conditions, so that's things like medically fragile children who might not necessarily have a diagnosis, but they've got all kinds of things going on, really high needs like tracheostomy tubes and tube feeds and that kind of thing. People with vocational funding, so this is people who have a disability and might not be able to get a job, but need some kind of support to access their community and get involved. Disability as a result of an accident, and that is ACC, which is Accident Compensation Corporation. So if they have an accident, we can support them. Some people with a mental illness, and I have mentioned that. And essentially, anyone who needs support in their community, even if they want to fund themselves, we can support them to do that. So like I said, nearly 8,000 people who are using some form of self-direction. And I remember when I started this journey with self-direction of Manawanui, and I think we had about 10 to 15% of the eligible population. So eligible is people who are in their community getting disability support in their own home. Now we have 47% of the eligible population accessing some kind of self-direction. That's hot off the press. I got those numbers yesterday. does not want to move forward. Sorry, guys. Seem to be a bit frozen here. Oh, there we go. It's just got to wake up. All right. So this is a list of the services that Manawanui offer. And it is just a list. The reason I put this slide in there is not to market our services, but rather to show that we have developed these services over time to wrap around our customers and make it as easy as possible. That's a critical success factor, because if it's really hard, as I mentioned at the beginning, when I did the first evaluation of individualized funding, that was the major feedback, was that it's so hard. There's so much paperwork. You know, we love it. We love having the choice and control, but the paperwork and the admin was a big barrier. So Manawanui has worked really hard over the years to develop a wraparound service for people so that they can get as much or as little support as they want. So that means they can do everything digitally from end to end if they want to. But if they need a human to be on the end of the phone or at their kitchen table, talking them through it, we can do that as well. So this is just a list, and I will go through, I have some screenshots of our digital platforms that I'm going to show you, but we also have a job matching service. We digital onboarding, we can onboard somebody completely digitally if they don't want to have us in their face or in their life or in their home. We have a customer experience center which answers any kind of queries, payroll queries, whatever. We have, of course, we have a payroll service and a payments service. Health and safety resources. We work really closely with the Employers and Manufacturers Association here in New Zealand to give people employment protection. We also have an insurance program for that, so that if they do get in trouble as an employer, they have some insurance in case they get a personal grievance. And we offer qualifications as well. If people want to train up their staff, they can do that through us. I'm really sorry, this is slow. Okay. So just some fun facts in terms of the state of the nation. So 25% of the New Zealand population identify as having a disability, and this comes from the latest full population census in New Zealand, so the survey of the full population. The government spends about 1.8 billion of government funding to fund disability support services. That's actually, in comparison to a lot of countries, quite low, but it's growing and growing. And I think that there's good news on the horizon in terms of what that will look like. We currently have about 43,000 people currently supported with some kind of funding in New Zealand. Roughly 17,000, that goes up and down, people who are eligible for community-based support. So those are the people that I said are getting community services, some kind of support services in their own home. 8,000 of those are using individualized funding and or some form, some iteration of self-direction or personal budgets. We generally have a younger demographic using individualized funding, and I'm really hoping that that will change and that will balance out, and we'll get a whole lot more people who are able to access self-direction. So IF, currently we have about 60% of our customers who are under 30. So we have a lot of young people and lots of mums and dads taking up self-direction, and that's because it works for their families, and very often people with higher needs. There again, that's because they get to choose what their support looks like. And what we have found is that some people who come to individualized funding are the ones that nobody else can make happy. They're the challenging people. And that is because they're sick and tired of being told how to do things when they know how to do things best themselves. So, and an interesting fact is that nearly a quarter of all of our customers hire more than 5 support workers. So if you remember, I said that that we have about 20,000 support workers. That's because of that 6,000, there's a whole bunch that hire a lot of people. And that's so that they always have care and support when they need it. So this is a glimpse of the different funders in New Zealand. This is about to change because there's good news, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But right now, the Ministry of Health is the key funder, all right? And DSS in the red box there means Disability Support Services, and DHB means District Health Board. DSS funds everybody under 65, and District Health Boards fund everybody over 65, and they're more health-based care and support, like hospitals and tertiary care. DSS is strictly disability. The Ministry of Social Development fund the vocational services and community participation aspect of disability. ACC is the Accident Compensation Corporation. So that's anybody who gets injured and has a disability as a result of an injury. We're just starting to wade into that group, that they have their own funding stream, and yeah, so we're making headway in there. And then of course the Ministry of Education, who support families and provide teacher aids and funding in the schools to support kids with disabilities as they go through the schooling system. And this is a glimpse of, I said, the DSS, so Disability Support Services, fund all of the major under 65 disability services. But that is broken up into different funding streams. So HCSS is Home and Community Support Services. And those are the lists of things. And under HCSS, that's where IF, Individualized Funding, fits. And then the demonstration projects, which I'm going to show you in a minute. I talked about the exciting news, and this is it. So a ministry for disabled people was announced in October of 2021. And this is the best news ever, because disability has been very disparate in New Zealand. And it's been a function of trying to take a little bit from that stream and that stream and that stream and mix it all together for bits of funding from different silos to make it work for people. And of course, that never works for people. So the best news ever is that the government has committed to a ministry for disabled people in New Zealand. And I've taken these points directly from the website. The development of the new ministry is led by the Ministry of Social Development, but it will be exclusively focused on people with disabilities. So nothing about us, without us, led by disabled people. It's going to be based on the Enabling Good Lives vision and principles, and I'm going to show you that next. And the government supports, it's based on supporting people in a lifespan, as opposed to here and now and for the next year. You know, we all know that people don't live year by year. Working in partnership with disabled people and ensuring a high level of trust and transparency and lifting the profile and visibility of disability across government. So, hey, fingers crossed that they'll live up to those commitments. And I am sure that the disability sector will have something to say if they don't. There's been already a lot of talk around this, and you know, a lot of positivity and a lot of hope, but also you know, the people establishing the new Ministry for Disabled People will have an accountability to the sector. And I think that's really positive. And here's a picture of Sarah living her best life in her spa. The Enabling Good Lives principles have been in place for probably about 5 or 6 years now. And here they are. And this is what the new ministry is going to be based on. And it's fundamentally about self-directed care. The first point is care and support, the self-determination. People should be able to determine how their lives look, beginning early, person-centered, ordinary life outcomes. So people should be able to do everybody else does. Everybody else without a disability, I mean. Mainstream first, mana enhancing, easy to use, and relationship building. What mana enhancing means, because I know that that might not be a term that's familiar to anyone, is enhancing your own sense of self. So you should be able to say, this is the life I want, and this is the life I choose, and this is what I need to achieve that. And it's really important to recognize that the basis for this is not necessarily funding. There's a really prominent disability advocate and participant in New Zealand called Lorna Sullivan, who says, who wants the government to run their life? And I would hazard a guess that that answer to that is no one. So it's really important that these principles are not linked specifically to how much money you get. Money is important for sure, but the whole of life approach and how you construct that life is really what's underpinning these principles. So this is an overview of the demonstration projects that I talked about earlier. So we had individualized funding established in 2004. That was hours of support and associated overheads. Then they thought that they had a lot of pressure. The ministry had a lot of pressure from the disability sector that individualized funding was not flexible enough. So they started enhanced individualized funding in the Bay of Plenty only, which is where I am now. Beautiful part of the country, but it was geographically limited. They started that in 2010. So that was just a wider definition of what you could purchase using your individualized funding. Then came the Enabling Good Lives first demonstration project, and that started in Christchurch in 2012. That was about saying, well, actually, you know, there's a lot of different ways that we could combine government money. First time ever that I've seen the government departments actually all working, you know, together. And that was, yeah, that's still going. Right now, the Ministry of Health manage it. There's 8 providers that have what's called a flexible disability supports contract. And what that means is they can construct packages of support in any way that they want to, or works for the person in partnership with the person. So they could have formal providers coming in. They could use part of it as an individualized funding approach or a personal budget, and just wrap that support package around the person. The Enabling Good Lives Waikato project started in 2015. There again, it was just a slightly different approach from Christchurch in that it was a lot more flexible. They did not use a NASC. So if you remember, I talked about the NASC being the gatekeeper. This project does not have a NASC. It has navigators who the person meets with and sets up a budget based on how they want their life to look. And then the Transformation Project, which started in 2017, this is what the government and the disability sector want to be rolled out across New Zealand. So they started this in 2017 based on the Enabling Good Lives principles, and with a main focus on individualized funding and self-directed services, personal budgets. Lots of iterations of this, and I'm just going to go through that briefly, keeping in mind my time is running out here. So the system transformation is called Manawhai Kaha, and it's all about individually arranged budgets. Now, these are budgets that personal budgets, and they can be in a lot of different iterations. So direct funded, where the money's paid up front and the person just purchases supports, or direct funded, where the money's paid up front and the person employs their own support worker. So one's an organization that delivers support, the other is what individualized funding looks like now. Assisted direct funding, where the money's paid up front and the person engages their own support with the assistance of a non-contracted host arrangement. Hosted personal budgets, now that's essentially individualized funding. And flexible disability supports, which I have just described. But there's more. There are centrally arranged personal budgets. So that's just the same as kind of the traditional approach where the person has chosen to use a provider, a contracted provider. Residential supports, yeah, that's not new. This is group homes and the like. Other centrally arranged supports, which are EMS's equipment management service. So that's what's already in place as around the edges of disability support. So behavior support services and residential services. Immediate resourcing, so that's when somebody comes into trouble and they need something quickly, like respite. And early investment. So this is saying, actually, we need to get involved early, and that's one of the enabling good lives principles. So why is this so important? I've said this, and I'm going to say it again because you can't say it enough. And it's a human rights issue. Everybody should have the right to be self-directed. It's fundamental to the human existence. And certainly if you talk about Citizen Network, one of the things that, that we are so passionate about as a member of Citizen Network is citizenship and participation in community life and society. And that is a human right. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, of course, is fundamental to that. And New Zealand is a signatory. So we have an obligation to make sure that people have access to self-direction. Of course, the outcomes are better and the costs are lower. And I know that that's a contentious topic, but I'm going to show you some research in a second. So here are the CRPD's principles, the fundamental principles that underpin all of the articles in the UN CRPD. This is what we all should be committing to. And there's nothing in there that doesn't imply or have an implicit assumption that self-direction is the way, right? Equality of opportunity, respect for difference, and acceptance of persons with disabilities. Here again, preaching to the converted, I know that most of you will be well aware of this, but I think that it's important to acknowledge that self-direction is a part of the UN CRPD. So this, I really want to say, has been one of our critical success factors in terms of being able to support, 6,000 people to be self-directed, and that is technology. So not only has technology made it easy for people to be self-directed with a digital, there's a spelling error there, sorry guys. The development has made it so that people can be self-serving to be self-directed, which I think is fantastic. And it has worked a treat. People can either do it all themselves or get support from us to do it. And it's fully accessible. So all of our digital platforms are accessible. Like we've got options for blind people, for deaf people. We're working on translations to other languages. But yeah, it's been a critical success factor. And can I also say the greatest thing about technology is it enables you to collect data. So, the data on our population is going to be critical in order to illustrate the difference and the transformation that self-direction makes in people's lives. So here's Philip again, the guy that wants an effing great life. This is just a little pictorial of what our platforms look like. And they're integrated from end to end. So you can onboard digitally. We have a workforce scheduling and rostering platform. We do payroll and claims for people. We have what we call it a client web portal or customer web portal where people can go on, very much like a banking site, where you go on and process, put in your own timesheets. You can add your employees. I'll show you some screenshots in a second, and a job matching service. Philip's story is that he has cerebral palsy because of a brain injury at birth, sorry. And he was one of the early people to adopt individualized funding, but he adopted it when none of this platform was in place. And he would be the first person to tell you that technology makes a massive difference. He says, give me the money and I'll deal with it. And so he's one of those early pioneer people in our world. And I can't thank Philip enough for sharing his story because it's compelling. So here's just a screenshot of what our statement, our online statement looks like. And you can see that It shows you the funding remaining in your allocation. The allocation is usually for 1 year. This is a test account, by the way, so it's not real data. But it mimics your personal banking, gives you real-time data for accurate info. It's highly secure and accessible. The little green arrow there shows what you've spent. The gray arrow is how much you have. And then at the bottom, it shows you all of the transactions that have happened in terms of your annual leave, any payments you've made, etc. And here is what our budgeting tool looks like. So you can see that at the top, you can enter all your employees and how much you're going to pay them. You can also enter your expenses. So you can see there it says a laptop and software. It'll show you the amount your allocation is against your budget. So the gray line there is the proportional budget. That's how much you should spend each month or for a period of time in order not to go above your budget. And the red line is your budget. So if the red line is below the gray line, you're good. But if the red line is above the gray line, then you have to go back and rebudget and figure it out. And the bar graph is just another way of looking at it. Okay, and then this is how people enter the timesheets. So you can see that it's just a really, really simple tool where you'd put in the hours that somebody has done on a different day. You can also give your employees access to this to put in their own hours. They can't, of course, verify it. You still have to go in and say, yep, Jane did those hours, Maria did those hours, Ian did those hours, and before they get paid. So it can't be misused. Yeah, and you can copy a timesheet too. So if you do the same, if somebody does the same hours every week, you can just copy it and put it through, and then we make the payment to those people. And here again, Sarah, this is the most important part of what we do. The outcomes, enabling people, empowering people to do what they love. And Sarah is nonverbal, but she certainly is communicative, and you can see she is an artist, and she does some fantastic art. She even has done shows in galleries, and she sells her art. So it has enabled Sarah to have a good life, and I'm sure that Lisa would attest to that. Like I said, there's still a long way to go because it's not as flexible as it should be, and it could be, but it does facilitate great outcomes. And these research results are in the Power of Freedom report, which I mentioned at the beginning. This is from the Australian Productivity Committee and Productivity Commission. And you can see that there's never there's one down, but use of hospital and other health services and residential care is a good thing to go down. And abuse and neglect, this just illustrates how profound the different self-direction can make is. And then this was a research project that Manawanui commissioned back in 2016. So it's old data, but the comparison between traditional services is the yellow line, and this is costs. So, and this is, the reason I put this in is because it's costs for people who get $60,000 or more per year, which is a high, in New Zealand, that's a high allocation. Our average allocation is about 30,000. And this shows that the use of IF, especially over time, by year 3, the costs have gone way down. And that's because people are allowed, or I hate saying allowed, they're empowered to buy what they need, not what they're told they need. And that's critical. And here's some work from Simon's group, the In Control group. This is profound as well, that the satisfaction goes way up in all of these aspects of people's lives after they take up individualized funding. But most importantly, here's Sarah showing her art. It's all about the outcomes, and it's all about people's lives. And even if there wasn't a cost benefit, there's certainly a quality of life benefit. And that's what we're here for. So what's next? These are some of the things that we think are important: building provider and system capability and capacity. We need to be able to scale this thing. Evolving authenticity. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people talk about the fact that they do self-direction, they offer choice, control, and flexibility, and what they're really offering is 3 choices of going bowling, to the movies, or to the mall, and that might not suit people. So authenticity is not about offering things, it's about asking what people need. Staying on course despite the politics. Now there's a challenge I'm sure you all can relate to. Cross-government funding and collaboration, illustration of the impact, and that's about the data, the data that we can collect using self-direction, and keeping the person at the center of our work. And most, like I've talked about, the most important evolution in New Zealand, and the most hopeful one, is a new ministry for disabled people, led by disabled people. And that is the end of the content. There is my email address. If anyone has any questions, you can email me if I can't answer them today. And also, I'm really happy to distribute this slide deck.
Thanks, Marsha. Thanks. That was great work. And we've still got 25 minutes left, so you did pretty well on the time management. It's hard, isn't it? Because the complexities and the details are important. And I think that's really one of the things we are trying to get people to think about in the SDS network. It's easy to have the high level rhetoric, but actually figuring out the practical solutions, especially when you've got to have lots of resistance. So sometimes you've got to create solutions that are in the way of compromise, but they're progressive compromises, aren't they? Yeah. At least that's my opinion. So there are a couple of questions. I'm just going to jump straight in, and if we Jim, I know Jim well, and Jim is one of the leaders of the independent living movement in Scotland. So I'm going to summarize. Jim might want to come back on this, but Jim has 2 key questions, just very practical things. One was, in terms of employment law, who is the employer? So I guess he's trying to understand, where are people with disabilities in this as employers? Is that an option? Is it not? And attached to that, he was talking about who gives day-to-day human resources advice. So could you just help ground the understanding of who's employing staff in these kind of models?
Yeah, absolutely. That is, well, I think it's a key question. In New Zealand, the disabled person or their agent. Well, the disabled person fundamentally is the employer, but we know that a lot of disabled people, and we have a mix of intellectual disability and physical disability. So, and that's about half and half. So if the person does not have capacity to undertake the employment responsibility, then they can appoint an agent to work on their behalf. And generally that is the mom or the dad, or a family member. The agent is never paid. So they're doing it for love. And that is to make sure that disabled people can't be exploited, in that respect. They can't, nobody can take any part of that money for the employment responsibility, right? And as you can imagine, it's a fairly significant one. So the disabled person or an agent is the employer, and they don't have to be an employer. They can just buy other services if that's what suits them. So there's a variety of options around whether or not you have to take the employment responsibility. It's not compulsory. In terms of the day-to-day employment human resources advice, we do give very basic advice, but we also have a very close relationship with the Employers and Manufacturers Association in New Zealand. So they are the one, and we have an umbrella membership. So any of our customers can phone up we call it the EMA, Employers and Manufacturers, and they can get advice. So let's just say your support worker turns up drunk, and you go, oh my God, what am I going to do now? You can employ you can phone up the EMA, and they'll say, this is the process that you need to go through. All right. And it gives them support. Underpinning all that is the insurance. So people pay $200 a year, and they get liability insurance for themselves. So if that support worker that turned up drunk then takes a personal grievance against them, the insurance covers that.
Okay, so in a sense, you kind of built in some insurance and systems right from the get-go for everybody employing. There's a kind of
Yeah.
default system, really. Okay,
Just to
that's
keep
dead
it
clear. And
Yeah.
the other, and I think you again touched on this, but I think it's an important question to come back to. So, sorry, Dita asked this. So, do you work with people with severe intellectual or complex disabilities? So, do you just want to just go through that a little bit more, Marsha? You did talk about this, but
Yeah, happy to. And it's a good question, because a lot of people assume that individualized funding is strictly for people with physical disabilities, like for example, Philip, who's very switched on. But we do have about half and half with physical disabilities and intellectual disabilities, and some of those intellectual disabilities are profound. Nonverbal people with cerebral palsy, all kinds of diversity, just a wide range of disabilities from end to end. So yeah, some of them are very, very profound. And in that respect, there's always an agent involved that can speak on behalf of that person. We're also doing a lot of work in New Zealand around supported decision making and what that will look like going forward.
So there are a couple of other interesting questions just popped up. I'm going to go to Peteri's next, and then I'll come back to Jim's question, which is a broader one. Peteri's asking a question about how well does the assessment work? Are the budgets the right size? What happens if they're not the right size? That kind of stuff. Can you give us a sense of how that process of assessment, challenge, definition works in practice?
Oh, that is such a good question, because the assessment is, we have 15 different NASCs currently around New Zealand. So you can imagine the difference between the assessment and the allocation from one end of the country to the other. You can live in Northland and get a completely different, have the same kind of context, maybe same disability, same kind of context, and get a completely different allocation than what you get at a different end of the country. And that's because it's subjective. And it's needs based. So that conversation with the NASC is based on how that person describes their need. So one of the things that I think is really important with the new ministry is that we're hoping that we have some kind of a consistent approach even to assessment, so that we can have some assurance. And here again, we can use the data, right, to have a feedback loop around about outcomes and how people are managing with the assessment which leads to the allocation. We're hoping that with that new ministry, there's some kind of evidence-based approach to how that's working and how we can make it better.
Now, so I'm going to take that on to, because that does link actually to Jim's question, but I'm just going to add a little bit to Jim's question. So Jim says, how does a Ministry of Disabled People facilitate funding integration? And I just wanted to pick this up because, I mean, this is a classic issue. New Zealand is not alone. I remember when doing very early work on this in Scotland, a family wanted to spend money on equipment, and the local authority was saying, but we have a different funding system for equipment. And I'm going, yeah, but they'll spend it smarter, quicker, faster, and it's all the same money. So when you say it's not, you said earlier, we like to spend it twice, but it isn't quite that, is it, Marsha? Because you're not actually spending it twice. What you're doing is the bureaucracy has a budget heading somewhere and is saying, oh, well, we have so much money for this and we have to spend it all, or we won't get it all again next year. And it's so irrational. And actually what self-direction does is allow you to spot where actually resources need to move more towards people, and in a sense need to be taken out of those systems, because the very fact that people want to spend the money on that thing tells you that the money is located in the wrong place.
Yes.
So yes. I wonder whether is what you've touched on actually kind of national standards of assessment as being an issue, but maybe Jim's question, do you see this, the Ministry of Disabled People leading some of these thinking? What are you expecting to see, really?
Yeah, so what I'm expecting to see and what we will see might be different. But what I can say is that that's exactly what we're expecting to see. Right now, people come to us and say, I want this piece of equipment and I want to use my individualized funding for that. And under the purchasing guidelines, we have to say, well, actually, there's another funding stream there. And so we can't approve that, right? What we're hoping is that that those personal budgets will be all encompassing. You know, if you'd ask me what utopia looks like, I would say, well, you know, housing, education, you know, all of those things come together in one personal budget that helps to support that person's life. I'm not sure we'll get that far, but I do think that they'll bring in an integrated approach with at least some equipment and some therapies, and also the division between the 65s and over 65s. You know, those are two completely different government bureaucracies. So, you know, we're hoping that when it comes to disability support, it will be seen as a lifespan approach, not just you know, age or geography that determines what you get. But just to answer your question, Jim, the Ministry for Disabled People is aimed at that kind of integration. Whether or not we get it is another story, but you know, that's where we have to be very vocal as a disability sector and active and involved with what this looks like, because people with disabilities know what their experience is, and they're the ones that should be writing the policy, or at least driving the policy.
And there are two more really good points in the chat. One, and I'm going to again pick them up in kind of reverse order. I want to come to Dieter's point, which is actually, I think there is something we can learn from New Zealand here. But Petri's just asking a slightly more technical point, which is, can the budget be, we've talked about equipment, but what about things like gym fees? Like my friend Wendy doesn't use a physiotherapy because she uses her personal budget to go to the gym, which is much more efficient and inclusive. Is that kind of thing open for people at the moment?
That's a really good question. It is now. It never used to be. So now, if you can defend that as a disability support, which is pretty easy, you know, fitness, health, all of that is going to contribute to my disability support, you can buy it, right? It's just a matter of articulating that. The other thing, you know, I mentioned therapies. What we do is encourage people to be really creative around that. So if you can't buy a physiotherapist because it's funded by the DHB, which is a different bureaucracy, then hire a physiotherapist to provide personal care or to provide training to your support staff so that you can then implement the physio program just by way of example. But yeah, to answer your question, services such as that are now under those 4 criteria, as long as you can articulate how it's going to support you with your disability.
And then, so now Dieter's question relates to that I guess, well, I'll read it completely. I think people can see it perhaps, but it was an inspiring presentation as well for us in Latvia. It is really difficult for us to work with the Soviet inheritance. Huge long-term care institutions still are the only one possibility for people with intellectual disabilities. Now, I think there is, I mean, there's a lot to be said, I think, regarding Dieter's point. I've put a link in Dieter as well to another interview with Marsha, which is on the Citizen Network website, where Marsha, you and I talked more about the kind of long history of progress and what it's taken. I remember a very important expression you used was the mother bear, which I think I found in many countries, which is where, you know, mums turn out to be often key champions of change. But maybe, you know, this is a long battle, as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, over 50 years. New Zealand has been at this for decades, I know, really. What advice could you give, if any, to Dieter about looking at it from that perspective, the feeling that maybe this is just almost impossible? What could folk in Latvia do you think?
That, you know, that's a very good question and a challenging one to answer, because it depends on a lot of different factors. But I would say that, you know, the power of the stories now makes a massive difference. And you need a couple of really good, compelling stories like Philip's and Sarah's, and, you know, telling those stories is really important. Motivating the disability sector and facilitating, you know, supporting people to be active and vocal is also really important. You know, we've got a couple of activists in New Zealand who are really driving change, and you know, those they're articulate, and they turn up and they say, this is my disability and this is why it's important for you to do it this way. Yes, that's one thing. Also finding your friendly, both friendly officials and friendly politicians. You know, I think that makes a difference. Tatiana Turia made a big difference to us because she understood what we were talking about, you know, and then she led that change quite fiercely, actually. And our chair was fundamental in pushing some of this change through. So that would be the advice. And yeah, I would say the momentum of the disability sector is everything. You know, we need to get people active. At one point, we did a template letter that we distributed to all of our customers to write to a certain politician and to all the officials. And I wasn't very popular for that move, but boy, did it make a difference, because we had, you know, 500 people sending in this template letter, and all they had to do was fill in the blanks, basically. And so you know, I'm not suggesting that really we've made friends with government to try and push change, and that's worked to date.
Well, Dieter, I'd add as well, just do stay in touch with the SDS network. So if we don't have a Latvian representative at the moment, so you could join and work with us to help draw stories. It does help to have local stories, but it's sometimes really helpful to have stories from elsewhere. And there's great stories from Finland, which is only across the Baltic. Yeah, please stay in touch and sign up. And we're still building the framework for this. Petra has again, a slightly more technical question, but it's about resistance, actually. So in Finland, for instance, they developed a fairly sophisticated system of vouchers, but vouchers, you know, no reference to the money. And so Petra's saying, what would you say to public authorities who argue that the system already has freedom of choice, like vouchers, and that SDS systems have risks, so they hesitate to implement it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the usual story, isn't it? I would, you know, I guess underpinning all of this is evidence, right? There is research out there now that shows that it's not as risky as people think. People buy things. When people have a personalized budget, a personal budget, they buy what they need. You know, they don't go out and buy cars and big screen TVs for giggles. You know, they buy support people that make a difference to their lives. And now that there is, you know, there's increasing data out there, I think I would, you know, encourage people to gather the evidence and gather the stories. And there's evidence that it's cost effective. There is evidence. We did a little snapshot at one point of fraud in New Zealand. And what we found was that there was 0.4% of the people that were using self-direction who actually got investigated for fraud. And of that, less than half of them were you know, went to court over it. And when and if they were convicted of fraud, they ended up back on individualized funding anyway, with the government coming to us and saying this is the only thing that works for them and they need support. So, you know, there's a lot of ways to make self-direction work, even within a limited context. Yeah, so I would say that, you know, you need to come up with the evidence, and increasingly, like you say, Simon, that's going to be international.
Yes, and I think I'd add one. I don't think I've managed to persuade anybody terribly of this argument. And yes, I think it's so true, which is that increased value always comes through innovation. So it comes through doing something differently. And that's true in every area of life. So if you lock the resources into fixed results, you've killed the possibility of innovation. If you make the resource flexible and move it into the hands of the people who have best incentive to make it work well, you maximize the chance for innovation. Innovation does mean efficiency, but it certainly means better lives, better use of the money. And it's exactly, you know, if you think about Sarah and Lisa, what I mean, there's no way a system could invent that kind of support. It's just impossible. So anyway, yes. So right, we've got a few more really good questions coming up here. So Petri asks, sometimes you need a little bit of help to make decisions. Tell us you touched on this actually, with supported decision making, and then Keith's adding to that question, what have you done to create the best conditions for peer support to flourish? Which I think is also really, if I look back at my work, if the biggest mistake I made when I was running In Control was not building enough peer support into our whole approach. So I think that's a really good question. So could you talk a little bit about that support around decision making, peer support within that? Okay,
so there's the macro view at a systems level, and then I'll talk a little bit about what Manawanui does in that respect. So at the macro level, supported decision making is not well developed in New Zealand. And that has come out of some recent court cases where it's been challenged that the ministry is the employer because disabled people don't have the capacity to be an employer. So we need more work on the supported decision making framework in order to enable self-direction in that context where somebody doesn't have capacity, but they have an agent. That has worked beautifully for the last 17 years with Manawanui, right? But there is no legal framework around that. And unfortunately, that's now come under challenge, which I think is a grave risk to self-direction in New Zealand. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, with all of those demonstration projects, one of the things that has been fundamental, and I did not mention this, is a local area coordination navigator, companion, we call it tohono, connector kind of role. And that role has been somebody that connects with the family and says, what support do you need to be self-directed, right? And I'll get to Manawanui's role in that in a second, but that's at the macro level. So when they come through the NASC in those demonstration projects, they also had the option to have a connector or a navigator or a tohono to help them to say, this is what I need to make this work, right? And sometimes that might be hiring a team coordinator or having somebody that from their local church, for example, to connect them to the community. It's a big, wide world of possibilities with the navigators. So I think that that's an important thing as well, because it helps build people's capacity and confidence. Some of the research that we did in 2016 showed that going on to a self-directed approach is terrifying for some people, because all of a sudden they haven't even had a job, and all of a sudden they're the boss, and they're hiring people and buying stuff, and they don't know whether they're doing it right, and all of that kind of thing. So those connectors are important. Our coaching team is really important in that respect. So those are the people that can go to homes, the home of the disabled person, sit down and have a kitchen table conversation around how to do this and take them through it step by step. So now I'm getting into the micro. And Manawanui we have the coaching team, and we also have our customer experience center, which is a fancy word for help desk, where people can call up and say, I don't know what to do here. What do I do? And that's a team of people that can talk them through it. The other really important thing in terms of peer support is we run regular network meetings around the country. And we do those in local regions. So for example, I'm in Tauranga. We have one in Tauranga, probably one every 6 months in each region. And that's collecting people who are using our services and connecting them to each other. And what we've realized over time is that the power of that is amazing, because you get those people who've been using, like Philip and we have some customers who've been on Manawanui since inception, for 15 years. And they give the best wisdom and support to people who are just starting. So we find that's a big thing. The other thing that we do as often as we can is hire people who are our customers to be the coaches, to help people on board and to answer those questions, and to be peer support, capacity building type supports. I hope that's answered the question.
I think that's a great answer, Marsha. Well, I think we're perfectly coming to our end, and I think you've done a great job. I think you've inspired a lot of people. I want to thank you. I think I want to make an observation. I might be wrong about this, but I'm stretching my brain to think about the different countries and systems I'm familiar with. And I think the kind of there are intermediate organizations in some other countries, like in a way it's quite common in the US, but they're also much more like part of the bureaucracy and driven by the bureaucracy. Whereas what you're doing is combining a kind of intermediate support and a kind of hosting service with actual innovation, stretching, challenging, supporting. So I think it's it's a really inspiring example of a particular version of self-directed support that I think we've all got a lot to learn from. Maybe we should be copying you, but at least we should be learning from you. And I think, again, it demonstrates the value of global learning, because it's very easy to just get into your heads thinking there's only one way to crack this problem, and you'll miss the opportunity. And I think the kind of technological work that you've done and your ability to work across the whole of the country and therefore simplify systems is really relevant in lots of places I'm familiar with. We've really struggled to see good technological solutions develop because they're not sufficiently rooted in people's lived experience. I get a strong sense that that's something you've really cracked. That this is a really practical system that people really value. So that's very exciting.
Well, I mean, one of the things I can say to that, well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. It's been great to, to speak to you all. But we never stop learning, and when I think we got that, then we find out we don't got it. So you just it's that perseverance, and saying we're not going to quit, and that we just take each mistake and each moment of chaos as a learning experience, I guess, and knowing that you're in it for the right reasons. Thank you.
Heidi, is there anything you want to say as our convener and organizer to finish?
Thank you, Marsha. It was really inspiring, and I'm just now a little bit jealous because I think in Finland we have a long way ahead, but it was really great to hear your experiences. And for the participants, we have our other next webinar coming in February 22nd, and we have Leanne Pearman from Australia then to talk about a little bit of Australia's experiences. So, but it was really great, Marsha. It was really, we are glad to have you here.
Thank you for the opportunity, Heidi.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day, and everybody in New Zealand, thank you, and Lisa and Bill and Sarah and everybody in Marsha, have a good, fun, productive, relaxing day, and the rest of us, we can go and have our tea or go to bed or whatever. Yeah. It's all right. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye for now.
Bye.